We've been hinting, pondering, and predicting it all year, but Jozy Altidore has officially left your Toronto FC. We'll talk about his legacy, impact, and plenty more on this week's edition of Waking the Red Weekly, presented by Footy Talks. My name is Mitchell Tierney, and ahead on the show, we'll also heavily overanalyze a preseason friendly, talk about both national teams, and plenty more. If you're watching the show live, you may have also noticed another face here on the screen, that of torontofc.ca writer James Grossi, who will be joining us all show for something of a preseason roundtable edition. When you have access to the wisdom of someone like James, you don't rush it. You take as much of it as possible. And also, I didn't feel like talking as much on this week's show. So we've got James on here to do some of that. But let's give a less glamorous intro as well to the regulars. Jeffrey P. Nesker, Michael Singh. What's up, boys?
Just a less glamorous cue to speak after you cue me. So there you go.
Yeah, a lot. I think I'm Mitch. Like in the before you sent us the rundown, you were saying, we were struggling to kind of come up with things to talk about, and then all of a sudden, this rundown's populated because there's a lot to dive into with this new Toronto FC. Let's call it this new regime here at the club, and we got our first glimpse of it over the weekend, and liked what I saw. But I'll throw it back to you because I know we have some more pressing stuff to talk to before we dive into that preseason game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be fair, given how much we've stuffed into the past couple of shows, I think it was mainly that there wasn't things I was deleting from the show rundown like I usually am, because we wouldn't have time to talk about them. But yeah, I mean,
true enough.
Jozy Altidore leaving Toronto FC. It's official. As I've said, it's a little bit of a complicated one to delve into on this show, because it feels like we've been eulogizing him since the start of the season when Greg Berhalter came out and said he might be leaving the club. And then, I think we all could have seen this coming, but officially official. The club revealing they've used their offseason buyout on him. Jozy posting a goodbye on Instagram, and now he's off to do 17 rounds with the turf monster at Gillette Stadium. So we'll go to you. We'll go to you first, James, because we haven't gotten your thoughts as much as certainly the Jeffrey and Michael thoughts on this throughout the weeks and past episodes. So what do you make of all of this and Jozy's lasting legacy on Toronto FC?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a real saga for TFC this past almost 2 years, sort of what the future would hold for Altidore. And it's been one that's been really tricky to cover. There's been a lot of sort of chatter in the background and a lot of half explanations for things that have gone on. I never really bought the whole Chris Armas was given the power to keep a guy like Jozy Altidore out of the starting lineup. It felt like there was more to that than a coach and player disagreement. And 18 months later, 24 months later, however it is, we sort of get the end of Jozy's time in Toronto. And just looking at the socials and everything like that, seeing everybody sharing their memories of their time with Jozy. I can talk a bit more about how I'm going to remember him and how I viewed his time, if you guys like. But it's I guess in professional sports, things always come to an end, and you'd hope that there's a good end rather than a bad end. And this is just sort of a fizzle out rather than the proper goodbye we would all like to see Jozy's time with Toronto come to. And I'm sure when New England comes to town, there'll be a way to say thank you to Jozy for a lot of the fans. But the saga's finally over. I guess we'll find out, in the months and years and decades ahead, a bit more about what actually happened behind the scenes. But I wish him luck in New England. And yeah, that turf is a bit of a question mark and how that's all going to play out. But a lot of people have been saying that this might be his way back into the U.S. team and onto the plane to Qatar. So who knows? The one part of the story ends and another one begins.
Did you guys see the New England socials tweet this morning?
I know you did, Jeff.
Yeah, that's a violation. I'm sorry, guys. That's a shot across the bow. I'm blinded.
Jeff, you're getting trolled.
Pardon?
You're getting trolled. It worked.
That's fine.
That's
fine. I mean, that's cool. If all bets are off and we can start trolling. They didn't know what they're getting into. That's all I have to say. Next time, finish his victory speech, because it did end with "I'm TFC until I die." That's all I have to say about that. Before we get in, and I do want to hear your I don't know if I want to call it a eulogy, but your countenance of how you feel about Josmer. But I got to bring up, because I've been getting DMs like crazy over the last little while. And we need to make this make sense. So, the wording coming out of New England camp is obviously, they're getting a deal on Jozy because TFC is footing his salary for the next 2 years. I think that's a careful use of language in order to paint them as kind of the victors in this situation. Because I've heard in the complete opposite that the buyout isn't actually a lump sum, and it's like, maybe a layaway plan kind of thing. So TFC paid 1.2 million of the 4, for example, that they owed him now, and they're paying the rest of it incrementally over years. So it can be worded by New England Revolution that they're getting a deal on his salary, but I'm getting a lot of angry TFC fans going, well, why call it a buyout if he's on our books for the next 2 years? So I guess I'm asking for the sake of TFC Live for some clarity here, because it seems to be a war of the words between two admins, right? Like, and people are getting upset.
Jeff, you're asking for clarity on MLS salary stuff.
Nobody's saying this has to be definitive, but can we at least come to some kind of a consensus here?
Here's all that. So I do want to, before we get into that, what I want to mention is some wild reporting, which, I mean, no reason to doubt them. They're the goats of MLS when it comes to reporting.
Yeah.
I want to talk about Jeff Carlisle and his kind of breakdown of sort of what happened here.
Very, very well. Very
so he was reporting for a while now that Jozy Altidore was under contract and through 2023, through next season. And that caught me by surprise, because I took a look at the press release when he signed his extension, and verbatim it said a 3-year contract extension for Jozy Altidore through 2022. So somewhere along the line, there was an option that was exercised by either Altidore or the club. And then a big bombshell dropped yesterday was by Sam Stejskal, who said Jozy Altidore's one of his contract options was exercised by the club apparently after the Chris Armas incident happened. Yep. So Jozy Altidore was apparently his contract option in some way got exercised for an additional year after that whole spout with Chris Armas. So kind of James, as you kind of predicted, there's perhaps a lot more going on behind the scenes that we're actually privy to. But that's something that costs MLSC an extra $2 million perhaps in this total buyout. So yeah, I mean, buyouts in sports, Jeff, is circling back to your question. Mm-hmm. It's not always just that you get your lump sum and you're here, we're done with you. It's more so like, for example, in hockey or basketball, you get a prorated amount through, let's say, 4 or 5 years. That actually does count against their salary caps. I think it's different in MLS there, but it's not uncommon for teams to pay the amount of your contract for X amount of years or whatever. So maybe that helps answer your question a little bit better.
Do you think it's disingenuous then for the admin at New England Revolution to start sprouting this nonsense that we're paying? I'm not losing
sleep over it. Like, who cares? To be honest with you, like,
sure. I mean, again,
money, right?
No. I mean, I don't want to belittle it by saying who cares, because there's been way too many DMs in my inbox with people that care very, very, very much. And I went into blinding rage off the top, because the wording made it seem, not only had we suffered through 2 years, or more than 2 years of this ongoing drama, will he or won't he, but at the end of the day, we're also paying him to play somewhere else, which is sort of what was communicated there, and I don't think that was on the level. I think it was very disingenuous, and I take umbrage with it.
I think it's a little bit of framing on the part of New England, where they're saying he's a max 10 player, but he's actually a fourth,
of course,
or whatever it is that they want to make it look like. So there's everything is optics in a lot of this stuff, and it's social media, so half of the point of putting that tweet out was to get a reaction from us. So mission accomplished.
It worked.
Yeah. I love how Mike goes, they're trolling you, Jeff, and Jeff proceeds to have a 3-minute rant on all the
They ain't
way,
gonna
Jeff.
like me trolling them. Let me just tell you, I got some things in the chamber. They ain't gonna like it. So
look, end of the day, Jozy Altidore is not on Toronto FC anymore. He's not on Toronto FC's books when it comes to the salary budget. He's going to be playing the next 3 years for the New England Revolution. And that's all TFC fans really need to, I guess, analyze here, because if you're going to go down and analyze the ins and outs of what an MLS contract looks like, good luck, because that's something I haven't even been able to wrap my head around, or most people covering this league haven't been able to wrap their heads around.
Why choose the word buyout? It's such a definitive bit of English to communicate something that is absolutely undefinitive. It makes it boggles the mind. Like, there are a lot of more
called, man. But let's again, like the semantics that we're arguing here, and I think overall, Jozy Altidore's legacy, was this the right time? As we talked about it, I think from a Toronto FC perspective, it had to be, especially with the direction that this club is heading now, and the rebuilding process that's going on under Bob Bradley, which we finally got a glimpse of over the weekend, as I touched on there. And if we want to segue into there first, Mitch, is there anywhere else you want to go before we do that?
I want to hear James's postscript on Jozy and what he meant.
Oh yeah,
James.
beautiful.
Yeah. When I think of what Jozy's importance has been to this team, I always sort of go to something that Michael Bradley said, and I can't remember exactly when he said this. I think it was right around the time that Jozy first came to the club. We can debate, when a match really starts. Does the next game start right after the last one finishes, or does it start when you start the tactical video, or does it start when the players on other teams are texting each other getting ready for it, or does it start when the whistle blows? But for me, the actual contest of the day sort of starts when the players are lined up in the tunnels, and we all know how active that TFC tunnel can be. And what Michael said was that when he was standing there getting ready for those 90 minutes, there was no man that he wanted to have standing beside him more than Jozy Altidore.
Wow.
And Jozy just sort of had this presence. And when the other team knew that Jozy was out there for TFC, it made more space for other people. The other teams had to prepare for him. He was just such a massive presence for this group. And we all know the big moments where he stepped up for this team and he produced. But that ability that he had to make the team better than it would have been without him in there. And that presence, I think, was something that we saw in the last 18 months was just as big when it wasn't there as when it was.
Yep.
When we look at that team defensively last year, there was a massive hole up at the top of the pitch where Jozy Altidore was supposed to be. And how many times did we see the team clear the ball up to where Jozy would have been to hold it for a couple of seconds, only to have it come right back down their throats and end up in the back of the net. And so, this was a saga that they needed to find some sort of resolution to. And I think as much as he was the cause of a lot of the good moments for this team, I think on the back end, as this unwound, he was part of the problem, and that's why it had to sort of come to some solution. I'm a little bit surprised that if he's going to be a TAM player, there wasn't some way that he could be a TAM player in Toronto. But I mean, I guess that just sort of speaks to how much those relationships have broken down, and how much stuff we don't really know about everything that's been going on. But so, when I look at Jozy's time here, I'm always going to remember those two things of how big he was in his presence and how big he was in his absence. And I sort of view the job that we do here as taking those couple of moments that we get with the guys to get to know them and to get to show fans a little bit of what they're about. And Jozy was a difficult guy to cover. It's got to be said. I think in all my years covering this team, there are very few players that I'd never got a chance to do a one-on-one with, and Jozy was one of those guys. And he had a tendency to be available when he had something that he wanted to put out there, and otherwise he wasn't. And I think, seeing everybody putting up their personal moments with Jozy was because he didn't need us to do that. He found ways in big moments and in small moments to connect with people outside of the control that we have over those moments. And so, how I remember Jozy doesn't really matter, because there's so many people that love this club that have their own little moments for what that guy meant to them. And when you look at the Mount Rushmore of TFC, you'd be pretty hard placed to not see Jozy's face on it. So, I'm going to remember the goal against Vancouver and that epic photo behind the net. I'm going to remember the MLS Cups. I'm going to remember, playing on broken ankles and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's the way he should be remembered.
Yep. Yeah. It's funny because in film, in the art world, we take a totally opposite tack, you know, because it's good copy to say that Billy Wilder wrote Lost Weekend in a weekend in a hotel room, right? But if he thought about it for 2 years before he rented that hotel room, then it actually took him 2 years and a weekend to write it, right? So it's just interesting, that perspective. I have a question for you. So what happens? I mean, we all love Josmer, so let's qualify it with that. But, you know, in the same token, it's not mutually exclusive to also say that him going to play 50% of his games on turf is patently insane. So what happens if he succeeds despite all of this at New England? Is it an indictment on our sports science staff, or is it just simply Jozy pulling another Jozy and, you know, change of place, change of scenery, getting rid of all that bad juju does wonders?
Is that for me?
Nobody wants to take it. I'm opening up to the floor. It's roundtable styles, guys.
I don't know, man. Like, what happened before has some impact on what happens after, but they're almost exclusive situations. Like, maybe the fact that Jozy's played so little over the last 18 months is what opens the window to him finding, you know, a way to revitalize himself here. So there's no real way. We'll see. You know, that turf has a pretty torrid history when it comes to TFC.
It's the worst playing surface in all world soccer, I think. So
it is. I think they've updated it since Danny Coopermans did his knee on it back in 2012. So, like, who knows? It might be a little bit better these days. And Bruce Arena's he's a sharp guy. You know, he knows this league. He knows how to manage things. Like, I remember him. He would refuse to send his starters across the country to play a midweek U.S. Open Cup game because that wasn't important to him. So does Jozy? Is he exclusively a guy that plays on the road when the pitch is nice? Like, maybe that's the play that they're going for.
Yeah.
And, like, you never know. Every coach needs to find a way to best use their assets. And I think with Bruce, they've got a guy who knows Jozy and knows what he's capable of, and also has the fortitude to make a decision that might be a little bit less popular than some other coaches might.
Yeah, and there's truth to that. He's not coming in as a DP. He's coming in as TAM, and that has a totally different expectation. Whether he's bought into that or not is, you know, no one knows except for Jozy. But certainly he's not expected to be the guy on a TAM contract. You know, it's just mind-boggling because we've heard it all before. You know, we've heard it like, well, just give him a couple more minutes playing time, and he's right back in that number 9 spot for the U.S. men's national team. Like, we've suffered through all of this coulda, shoulda, woulda for a bunch of years now. So it's just funny to see the enthusiasm coming from another fan base, and try not to, you know, to get up on our soapbox and say, bless you all. We hope it works out for you.
Jeff's really bitter about this.
No. I don't like careful language. I don't like disingenuous attempts to rewrite and own a narrative. And I find the optimism kind of cute. Maybe I'm proven wrong.
That's like every organization done this. Like, think about the Toronto FC press release. Did they ever mention in their original press release with Jozy Altidore's extension that there was an option in there that could be exercised?
I'm glad they didn't, because there would have been riots in the streets. But
little things that you don't even notice that are optics. It's just the way the world works there in the organization.
Let me preface by, or let me again outline that I'm entirely hypocritical here, and you can tear my argument apart in 2 seconds. I'm speaking from a place of emotion, so I welcome anybody ripping it apart. But this is just me unfiltered. So
yeah, let's put a bow on this. I think.
Go
ahead.
There's one thing that you mentioned there, and that was Jozy's presence. And I think back to when he came on against Orlando City, after his first game back after the Chris Armas spat, as we refer to it now. And you talk about presence. When Jozy Altidore's number 17 got shown on the sideline there, it was like getting a 12th man on the field in addition to Jozy Altidore. And then he went on to score that goal. And I vividly remember sitting in the press box, and I won't say a name, but someone who was perhaps affiliated with the club gets up and yells, Jozy. That was kind of the vibe that he brought, in terms of everyone wanted to see what Jozy Altidore did, and everyone knows what he meant to the club. And his legacy, will it be tarnished? I don't think so. I think at the end of the day, the fans are gonna remember what you said, James, and that's the big moments and what he did for this club. And now is the right time, if not a couple years ago, for them to kind of go their separate ways. So yeah, I think that's putting a bow in it. On my end, Mitch, anything else you want to say to wrap up that Jozy segment?
I'm glad we got another Eric Giacometti story in there before we.
No idea.
I have no idea if that's what it was.
I thought you were talking about James Grossi, but
I'm just kidding.
Could be. Could be.
I think yeah, I think you touched on something there, which is just, I mean, look, it's not the Hollywood ending. No Hollywood superstar gets bought out at the end of their time with the club. Like that's not how the ending goes. But it could have been so much worse. Yeah, they could have been so much worse. Like there were so many moments between like conflict between the club and player, injuries, that kind of thing. At least we got a bit of a swan song with Jozy, where that moment at BMO, even him ending CF Montreal's playoff. Hope, like there were some beautiful moments at the end there that make it less sour now that he's leaving. So I do think it was good that at minimum he got a bit of a better ending than, you know, the way things could have gone, considering how the last few years Toronto FC and Jozy Altidore have played out. But from one move that I think we all predicted to another.
Hold on, one last question. If he scores against us at BMO, do you think he celebrates?
I don't know. At BMO, I think I don't know. I don't really go in for this. Don't celebrate against your former club.
Goals are
goals. You know, it's a bit disingenuous, but I think it's done respectfully, if that's possible. I think it's sort of like the raised arm, the sort of like understated celebration if it happens, and we all know it's going to happen because that's what happens when former TFC players.
I think he scores and then just stares straight up into the Toronto FC like press box and like, look what you did.
Oh man, that's gonna suck. Anyway, let's move on to more suck. Mitch, you want to cue us up?
Well, yeah. Auro Jr. leaving Toronto FC as well. There's a move that I think we didn't expect as much. Mike, you wanna take this one, because Jeff and I tried to dissect it last week on the show and didn't come up with much, to be honest, in terms of why this makes sense. So
sure.
Why does it?
So if you're trying to assess this from a tactical perspective or a footballing perspective, you're going to find yourself scratching your head, because as we all know, Toronto FC don't have any natural right backs on their roster. After the departure of Richie Larea, everyone thought Auro was a shoo-in to come back. And I actually heard Auro was perhaps going to leave the club at the start of preseason or start of the off season. And then after Richie's move came to fruition, I was just like, yeah, no way that's going to happen. And what I'll say here is, when you look at last season and everything that Toronto FC has kind of gone through the last couple of years, there's a lot of management that comes with it, with those relationships, and these guys are human, right? We often forget that they have a lot of personal stuff that they go through and all of that. And last year, Bill Manning came out and said that the club lost its culture, lost its identity, and it started really at the BMO training grounds. And I'll say this here, Auro could have been part of that problem. And there's a lot of guys on the team last year who is no longer here, is no longer going to be here, that kind of formed a little group there, is what I'm told. And there was a line drawn in the sand by Bob Bradley this year in the Toronto FC's regime. And I know he has that tattoos. I know he loves the city, but I'm told that Auro picked his side. And
I mean, how is that cryptic, Nathan? Like, it's like the least cryptic Mike's been in a long time.
It's fine. So that's pretty much how I'll phrase it. There is, Auro kind of picked his side when it came down to it, and this TFC team has shown no reservations about getting rid of someone, no matter how established, no matter how good, no matter how important you may seem to the actual footballing squad. If you're not a fit culturally, with this team in the direction that it wants to head, they have no problem turning the page and moving you on. So Auro, at least you love to see like what he did for the club, and he's a great player, and you love his commitment to this country and to the game. But if you're not committed to 2022 Toronto FC as much as you perhaps should be, um, again, the team has no problem kind of turning the page there on you, and I think that's exactly what transpired here.
Yeah,
Fair.
James, your thoughts on the situation as a whole?
Yeah, I think that a lot of that is news to me, and I can sort of see that. Bob alluded to some players' hearts not being in it in a bit of a cryptic phrase of his own when he was asked about some of these departures. And Auro, I could sort of see how he could fall in that category. He was always a bit of an aloof guy. He was always a guy that sort of marched to his own beat and sort of was off to the side, doing his own thing in his own sort of way. I do think that on the field, I can see one way that it makes sense. Like, yeah, of course, you're losing one of your more reliable defenders. A guy that's going to be a 7 out of 10 every game, and it isn't going to cause you problems on the field. But Auro was never really that all-out attacking fullback, and whether that was his instruction or whether that's what he's capable of, we don't really know. But we see Jaquil Marshall-Ruddy and we see Jacob Schaffelberg pulling up those positions, and Bob clearly wants something very different from there than Greg Vanney wanted in that possession interplay-based fullback that Auro was when he first came in. So I sort of see a way that you're taking a risk by putting in guys who don't have a ton of experience and replacing a guy who was a pretty solid piece for you there. But if that jives more with what it is that you want to see this team doing, then maybe he was expendable on the pitch as well as off it.
Yeah, that's my point exactly.
Well, let's move on then to the first glimpse we got of the new Toronto FC, and again, a billion asterisks and qualifiers here because first of all, I mean, there was no numbers on the back of the jersey, so that tells you
awesome.
That tells you this game is about level wise. I mean, it's preseason. Both teams making a billion subs, testing out their full roster. But I think we can still at least partially analyze some of the things we've seen in terms of what Toronto FC might look like a little bit tactically this season. Some new roles some of the players have been playing. Toronto FC, of course, getting a 1-0 win in that match against the Chicago Fire. The traditional lightning delay, everything worked out great for Toronto FC in this matchup. I guess we'll just get general thoughts right away. There's a number of ways we could go with this, but we'll start with you, Jeff. What were your thoughts from this match, and what stood out to you?
Damn, we look good, fellas. We look pretty good out there. I mean, my general thought is I am all in on our new converted modern attacking fullbacks. You've been singing JMR's praises for a while, Mitch, and last week you were talking about how excited you were to see him sort of slot into that attacking fullback role. Man alive, did he look good out there. Schaff was a little bit more anonymous than we're used to seeing him, but he was sort of like playing all kinds of roles in that messed up Yavi system last season near the end of it. So it was nice seeing him given a bit more responsibility, but these guys are pace merchants. Like it's crazy. So, the fact that we can start a transition attack that quickly with guys that are that comfortable on the ball, that far back in our defensive half is pretty exciting. And I think, I don't want to steal everybody's points, but that I'll open with that. It was really exciting to see those guys in their new positions.
And we've talked a lot in the past about Toronto FC just being too slow. Like in general, everything moved too slow. The players were too slow. This injection of speed and I guess north-south to borrow a hockey term, ability is so needed for this club. So we certainly saw that verticality within this game. James, we'll go to you next.
I like those collars on those kits, man. You don't see enough shirts with full collars like that.
Wait, are you sure you're not Jeff? I didn't send that back to
you. I don't know what those were, but I quite enjoyed that. the no numbers was a bit weird. I felt for the announcer. He seemed to be struggling a little bit with some of it, but I can't imagine, if Chicago didn't have numbers, they had
No
numbers.
idea.
I couldn't tell who.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't fault him for that. And, aside from the hail and the wind, I liked what I saw, I know we'll touch a little bit further on a couple of the individual guys, so I'll just keep it general. But, I mean, like, that goal, something, and I hate going back to Greg Vanney all the time, but it's such a frame of reference for so much when I talk about this team. But one of the things that Greg wanted to develop with this group was goals that were intentional. Not goals that came from a bit of magic from somebody, not goals that came because the other team made a mistake, but goals that were created because you went out there and intentionally created a situation that led to the goal. And I think that Toronto FC goal, Pause dishing it off to Nelson finding Schauffelberg attacking the box, cut back into the middle. I don't know how intentional Pause's touch was towards Jimenez there, but that idea of you find that space, you attack, you prod, and you put the ball into a dangerous area, like that's got to be exactly what Bob has been instructing the team to do these past couple of weeks. We've seen a couple of them from the little grainy clips that we get from other games. The Achara ball to Peruzza was a bit of a similar motif, if you want, but I thought that was good, especially, it's weird to say we're both early in preseason and a week and a half away from the opening game of the season, but that's kind of how things are going this year. There was a fair bit of defensive vulnerability that I think is natural. I think that's a function of those two young fullbacks that we saw. Alex Bono had to come up with that double save and then the trickler off the post, and Greg Ranjitsingh came up twice in the second half.
What a game.
Pretty big save.
Yeah.
And I think, looking at the biggest picture, Bob's been very loath to use the word pressing because I think we all jumped on top of it so much when Chris Armas came in that it's sort of like a forbidden word now in TFC circles. We saw a little bit of that active defense where TFC were able to pounce and react when they turned the ball over and regain position, return over the ball in really dangerous spots. And I think that's something, we saw Michael Bradley pushed up at the edge of the other team's box trying to force turnovers. And
it was craziness. Yeah, so risky.
And we saw some of that, but I think that's just a hint of where this team is sort of going.
Can I interject for 1 second just before I forget? This rumor of Bob Bradley preaching that like 6 seconds, the Pep Guardiola kind of school of you lose possession and you have 6 seconds to get it back. Otherwise you collapse into your defensive shape. Would you say we saw examples of that in the preseason game? That kind of
a little bit. It's the pack hunting. It's not the whole team pressing all out all the time, but it's sort of like the 2 or 3 guys closest to it recognizing that the other team doesn't have a fully formed idea at that moment. It's just the way of the game right now. Where if you give teams a chance to get into their set structures, they're gone and they'll play right through you. But if you can catch them in that little gap before things have taken shape, you have a chance of returning it back over. And 10 years ago, the game was all about those moments of transition, and now it's about the transitions from the transitions. So we're just going down a
very well
hole.
put.
It's turtles all the way down, so we'll see how it sort of works out. And it was a promising first look. I try not to read too much into preseason, but you look for those little things, those little themes that have sort of come up in the conversations we've had and how they're being implemented.
Yeah. This is one thing I've been told about Bob Bradley, Jeff, as you made that point about Pep, is that he's a no matter how experienced he is right now, he's a student of the game. In the world game. And I know, that I'm sure there's a lot of things he's looking at, and he's taking ideas from a lot of different clubs. And there's little things I think we'll see throughout the year at Toronto FC that we perhaps didn't see with some of his previous clubs. So just something to keep an eye on, worth keeping an eye on. And overall, like Bob Bradley, I was impressed by how much he's impacted this group, because a lot of the guys that were on the pitch, they were all on the roster last year, save for, a couple pieces there. And it looks like a completely different team, albeit against the Chicago Fire without their star designated player in Jirdan Shaqiri. So one of the worst, if not the worst team in Major League Soccer on a crazy, it's reality, on a windy, haily day, rainy day. So take that again with a grain of salt. But I did like his ideologies kind of coming through into this team, despite I believe what a lack of full talent, at least on the squad right now.
Yeah, this is very much an aside, but James used the term pack hunting. And if you haven't seen the videos of the Dutch national team from, I think it's like the 70s,
Oh,
where
yeah.
they play their pressing style, where all 11 guys go after the guy with the ball and like send in the craziest tackles, please pause the show. You can come back to it. Go watch those.
You know what? You owe
2 minutes.
TFC Live a link in a tweet later.
Yeah,
Mitch,
yeah.
so-
Maybe I'll send that out later
Yeah,
because
yeah.
that's incredible. And I yeah, that was soccer at its purest.
What did we think about the pause Oso first half double free roll pivot of attacking excitement?
I think that's what you sort of need and want in that part of the pitch. Like guys, and we saw a little bit of it from Bradley under Armas last year, and Bradley's been chained to the front of the back four for far too long, given his skill set. And you hope as guys spend more and more time playing together, that understanding of who's going and when to go, and guys being able to get rest and cover ground for each other. Those three have played together for a long time now, and Pause is supposedly fit, and Bob's asked him to be more responsible defensively. That's one of the things that's come out in these conversations. And we saw Paz has been such a hard guy to get a read on, because that first year he came here, he was fantastic, but he had like 187 matches under his belt in the previous year. And then last year that all sort of broke down, and he had his injury troubles, and he had his off-field issues. And so where is this season going to see him? We don't quite know what you're going to get from him, but he's a baller. He can take care of both sides of the ball there. One of the first plays that I remember him making was giving the ball away very terribly at the edge of the opponent's box, and running back 60 yards to make the tackle at the top of TFC's box to make up for his own mistake. And so
I know
it's a work in progress with those three, and they got a lot of young legs that can come in and do minutes. I know we'll talk about Ralph Prizo getting back out there, nibble account, looking sharp and all that sort of thing. But those three are going to be really important pieces for TFC this year.
I actually think that's not something he gets a lot of credit for, James, is his ability to win the ball back or put pressure, because obviously Paz is crazy skilled. In a number 10 role, you don't necessarily see that kind of bite from a number 10 that plays this kind of style that Paz plays. But when he is motivated there, he's a guy who can apply a lot of pressure and do a lot of work in that midfield you don't really give him credit for too often. So I like how you pointed that out. And if we can see some of that out of Paz this year, I know Bob Bradley will be a big fan of that. And I'm sure TFC fans would as well, because that's what this team needs right now in the midfield. Because no offense to Michael, who does an amazing amount of work there in the midfield, he's getting up there in age. And if there's one question mark, I think, about the midfield specifically last year, is you got caught in transition a bit too often, because there's a lot of ground that you were asking them to kind of make up. And having someone like Paz there does actually help when he is healthy and fit and capable of running for long stretches of the match. So I like them together. This is guys who've played together now for years, albeit now it'll be kind of a different sort of system, a different role, but they know each other. And I like the way that Paz linked up with Jimenez. I like the way Jimenez linked up with the entire team, actually. I thought he fit in really nicely, connected a lot of the dots. And of course, his goal was really well taken. So up top, I thought there was a lot of positive, and in the midfield, again, positive, no pun intended.
Yeah, well, I mean, Pozuelo has been that frame of reference for the attack for most of his time here, just because Jozy's been injured. Io's had his injury troubles.
True enough.
I mean, when he first came over from Belgium, he was kind of advertised as a bit of a deeper playmaker, right? Like he played a bit of more of an 8 role than a 10. And we saw that in his first couple of games, like James mentioned, where he played more of a defensive style and put in a bunch of tackles and that sort of thing. And that certainly, like, as much as Mike was saying, like, he does do that more than I think we give him credit for. Like, that certainly has slowly come out of his game a little bit, but part of that is just because he hasn't really had players in front of him to do the like major attacking role. So at that point, he's being relied on fully to be their frame of reference for the attack. And this year, that's not necessarily going to be the case in the same way. He can kind of let some of that running and some of the other things that are the attacking players are relied to do go to other players, like you mentioned, Jimenez, obviously Insigne when he gets here, some of the other guys that are in and around the club right now. So I think there's more of an opportunity that we see defensive pause this season, and I think that's going to be a massive positive for Toronto FC to keep using the positive.
I love it. I love it.
Not on purpose.
Let's get to your guy, Mitch, because you tweeted out like 20 seconds into the game that you'd only seen Carlos Salcedo in a TFC shirt for about 20 seconds, and he's already your favorite player. Can I cue it by getting Nathan's question here? He's saying, are you comfortable with the CB situation? Mavinga, Soseldo, O'Neill, and McNaughton? Is that enough? Mitch, take it away.
I mean, look, I saw him play a pass with the right, and then he switched the ball over and played a pass with his left. And I don't think we've had a Toronto FC center back that's been able to do that in maybe ever, honestly, in that way.
Yep.
There was some errant passes. There was some, there was some disconnects certainly, but just that raw technical ability, I think, from the back line is something that's going to be a game changer for Toronto FC, and is something that's going to make them so much more dangerous. Again, when we're talking about this team being quicker and more vertical, they haven't really had that player that can build out of the back for seasons now. And now they have that player, and I think certainly on the attacking side, that makes them way more dangerous. Am I comfortable with the center back situation as a whole? I need to see more. Like James was saying in his roundup of the game, they did break down a lot. There was a lot of like pretty bad defensive errors, and I think especially in the second half with McNaughton and O'Neill, there was some concerns there in terms of getting beat for pace and losing guys and that sort of thing. So it remains to be seen, but I think it's unquestionably better, and there's a lot more potential there within the group that exists now to do what Toronto FC needs and to keep more, certainly keep more clean sheets. And I mean, they have a pretty low bar here in terms of what they need to improve on. The team was not great as a whole defensively last season. So I think decent first. I mean, again, they got a clean sheet in that first preseason game, but some of the other preseason scores that have been coming out have been
less than clean sheety.
Less than clean sheety. So I think certainly this is looking more 2015 than 2017 at the moment, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm. I like what you said there about Salcedo and his ability to kind of move the ball. And another thing I'll add is Omar Gonzalez was in that position last year, and you want to talk about an upgrade, like that's a significant upgrade. And one of our biggest vulnerabilities last year was getting caught down that right flank, because Richie Laryea loved to dart forward, and that would often leave Omar Gonzalez making up a lot of ground, which he wasn't great at this point in his career. But also, like, he was left in 1v1s often, and I'm way more comfortable with Carlos Salcedo tracking out to the wing if he needs to kind of shut down an attack coming down that side, or taking someone on 1v1 and defending it comfortably than I was Omar Gonzalez, and way more comfortable with Salcedo at the ball at his feet. As you mentioned there, Mitch, I was really impressed by his ability to move the ball quickly with both of his feet. Like, no matter how great the ball was looking, the touch was looking, he made a strong, comfortable pass in uncomfortable spots, which is something that isn't necessarily an easy skill to I guess perfect here in Major League Soccer. Am I comfortable with the TFC center back situation? Hey, what I'll tell you guys is TFC is not comfortable with that center back position. So you guys can read between the lines there. I've mentioned it on this show in the past, the players that they are after, and nothing's changed from when I mentioned it about a month and a half ago. So fans of the show, that one's for you guys. You guys know what I'm talking about, and that's all I'll say there.
Yeah, one thing I will say as well about Salcedo before we get to James is while he gave the ball away at least a decent amount, I didn't think there were too many dangerous giveaways. Like, the balls that he gave away were like long balls to the wing where, yes, they got picked off, but they weren't coming straight back down Toronto FC's throat. Like, they weren't these terrible hospital passes up the middle that we've seen Toronto FC play way too many times in recent years. So I think he was at least somewhat smart about even if probably played more long balls than he needed to and that sort of thing. He wasn't playing these ridiculously dangerous balls that have cost Toronto FC in the past. But James, your thoughts on, I guess, Salcedo or anything?
Yeah, I think this is the least like scientific assessment I could possibly give you guys, but some players just look good out there. You know what I mean? Like they look,
Yeah.
No, that's
good.
yeah.
They look commanding. They look
Mhm.
assured, and we saw that in Omar at times, especially that first season he was here.
Truth.
But it was gone last year, and Toronto always looked like they were unsteady in that place. And couple minutes into Salcedo's first appearance that we get to see, and he's already barking at guys, and he's telling people where to be, and he's orchestrating at the back. And I think it's pretty clear that with him, TFC have stiffened their spine a little bit, and
Yep.
that's what you want. We saw him, wherever the ball was, he was engaged in what was happening. He was, as I said, orchestrating things, and I think that's going to be important with the young fullbacks we have back there, and with all the moving pieces that we have. But along with what I mentioned about Jozy was he had presence out there, and you could sort of feel how the rest of the team could relax a little bit knowing that he was there. We saw Michael Bradley. I'm sure Michael appreciates having somebody like him behind him, and then the effect that can have on Chris Mavinga. Chris has always been a guy that excels when he's focused on doing what he does best, and he doesn't have to worry about the moving pieces around him. And with a guy like Salcedo Chris can just focus on being Chris, and everything else will sort of fall into place. And so that's, like you said, there were a couple of bad giveaways, nothing too dangerous. There was a bit of a tackle there where it looked like he hurt his knee. So hopefully TFC's, injury problems did not come back to rear their heads. But from what I saw in that first 60 minutes, he answered a lot of the questions that the team had. And now, structurally, as the core defensive group, I think there's still a lot more work to do there, both at the center back positions and the fullbacks. And we don't really know quite what Bob wants this team to look like. They've been in a back four as far as we could tell for all these preseason matches, but whether a back three comes into play, if that's necessary, then we'll sort of see as the season goes on. But yeah, I think I'd expect there to be more movement on that back line, and before, maybe not anytime soon, but before the season's done, before we really get a look at what this Bob Bradley team is going to look like, there's a lot more work to be done in a lot of areas on the roster.
It's going to be a fun summer, James. It's going to be a fun
When
summer.
When I walked away from that first press conference with Bob Bradley, I was just thinking, like, it hadn't been a lot of fun to cover TFC for the previous 9 or 10 months, and we walked away from the BMO training ground. I was just like, I don't know what's going to happen, but this is going to be fun. It's going to be fun to talk about. It's going to be fun to watch, and it's going to be fun to learn. Every coach that comes in, you learn a little bit more about the game, and it's going to be fun learning, by watching what Bob does with these couple players.
And it looks like the players are having fun too. Like, one thing I wanted to mention quickly is like, and again, this is us covering training camp from however many miles away, so we're reading into this stuff more than usual. But like, you see Salcedo posting on Instagram with all the other TFC players, like you see the camaraderie that seems to be developing, and there's a certain departed Toronto FC player that you didn't see that very much with, who you might have replaced in a direct swap. So I think stuff like that already is a good sign. I know it's not everything, but I do think it is a good sign that he's integrating well into this group, that he seems to be a player that is well liked within the group, and that's going to be important because he's a very, very crucial player to how Toronto FC season goes as a whole. Mike, you had a point though.
Yeah, one more thing I want to mention on the Salcedo is, as James kind of talked about, as Mavinga can kind of play his own game with Salcedo back there. Salcedo also buys you some time with some of these young fullbacks. You can perhaps afford to deploy a Jaquil Marshall-Rudy at right back because you have Salcedo there covering, as opposed to Omar last year, who you probably didn't feel very comfortable with him in that sort of role. So Salcedo does give you that flexibility, and as I mentioned, he buys time. So there's a lot more moves that are going to be coming down the pipeline when it comes to TFC, and if you can get to the summer window, which I know is something that this team is aiming for, especially with the arrival of Lorenzo Insigne and then a couple other guys, then you're sitting in a very good spot. So it's a good start. Can this team do it And I guess moving on to kind of another note here we have on our rundown, are we comfortable with where this team is at heading into the start of the season? That's where I'm at. That's exactly where I'm at. I liked what I saw a lot, but can they do it against a New York City FC, for example? Or can they do it against the New York Red Bulls with the New York Red Bulls kind of pressing and bringing in some of the other guys that they've brought in? Or there's a lot of teams that are improving now, and I wonder what TFC will look like and what position they'll look like in the summer. So it's going to be an improved side, I think, is what I'll say. Can they get there? I'm not sold yet.
I think my thing is, I mean, every year you go into a season with a lot of unknowns. This year for Toronto FC, what do you know? Like, what do we know?
Nobody messes with the Jesus. That's what we know.
Do we know which Bradley we're getting? Like even the players that have been here for a long time, like have been up and down the past couple of seasons. Do we know when Io's coming back? Like, there's just so many questions, and there's not very many things that we can almost bank on going into the season. So I think that's what it is so tricky about this roster is, like, on paper, sure, it looks pretty good, but who knows what the heck Toronto FC side we're getting this year. We don't even know what style they're going to play because the coach is completely new. So this is the most like unknown Toronto
it's crazy. I don't know if you've been looking at the chat, but I've been trying to find a way to work in the Westberg versus Bones debate, and now we've got New Boy who like stood on his head for so it's like let's put him in. So I mean now you know, we started last season with 2 number 1 keepers, and now we seem to have 3. So you know, there we go. Do we want to talk the keeper, or do we want to talk Jesus? Do we want to talk about Jesus? What do we want to do next?
Let's talk keepers. Let's do it.
Sure.
Let's do it, because I know a lot of people have been asking for that. And
how is this guy? How was he the pool keeper? He's amazing. I mean, very small sample size. Granted,
very small sample size. Again, against
he's the best keeper I've ever seen. All right,
let's qualify this as it was against the second half of a team that Michael Singh labeled as one of the worst in MLS, like the second half roster. So
yeah.
So I think. Yeah, Ranjit Singh is some great assurance, something they haven't had for the last 2 years at that number 3 keeper spot, maybe even prior to that. So I do really like the signing in case someone does go down. Number 1 for me this year, just got taken a stab at it. I got to say Quentin Westberg. I think he's more in line with the type of game that Bob Bradley wants to play. Bob Bradley is someone who likes keeping the ball, and I think Quentin Westberg can do that, and he can also pick a pass, obviously, as we've talked about so much. He can pick a pass that gets you going in transition, and when you have someone like Lorenzo Insigne and on the other side, someone like DeAndre Kerr or Dayton Nelson kind of shifting over, that part's exciting. I still think Alex Bono really does struggle with that. I thought he struggled with it on Saturday's match once again. I don't think there's been much movement there, much improvement from the last couple seasons with his distribution, and both these guys are very good keepers. So I think that small factor I think Westberg wins out because of that.
Well, what I will say before go to James here, I think with this Toronto FC side, and again, we're learning a little bit more about it, but I do think there's a little less need for a super technical goalkeeper because they just do have more technical players along the back line. Like, you just need to make that, like,
Danny just said that in the chat.
Yeah, Danny just said the same thing.
Oh, there you go. Perfect. Yeah, you just need to make that 10-foot pass to Mavinga or Salcedo or Jaquil Marcharuti, and there's, like, they can do the rest from there, which Toronto FC didn't have last season. So I do think that's at least part of the equation. But James, I do want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with you both. Like in terms of, it's still the same case of Westberg is better with his feet, and Bono, I don't know if you could say he's a better shot stopper, but we saw a couple goals last year that Quentin would have liked to have had back in terms of giving up softer ones. And, you know, a lot of that, you know, goals are never exclusively the fault of the goalkeeper. So I don't relish the fact that we're going into another year where we don't know who the number 1 goalkeeper is. And now, as you guys say, number 3 comes in and shows himself very well. You know, Greg Ranjitson came on my radar back when he was playing with Louisville City FC in USL,
Oh, wow.
and he led that team to two like back-to-back championships and stood on his head. And I saw, I'm not going to claim that I watch a ton of USL or anything like that, but TFC2 was in that league back then, and I caught a little bit of that playoff run. And he was a big-time player. You sort of disappear as a goalkeeper when you go into that MLS pool role. And, he initially signed, I think it was with Philly, and bounced around to a couple of different clubs. And if there's one thing that we've seen in this league and with North America, it's that there's a lot of goalkeeping talent. And sometimes these guys don't get their chance. They don't get their chance to get a run of games together until they're 28, 29, 30, whatever it is. And so, if we're looking back in 3 years and he's a starting keeper, I wouldn't be stunned. And you can't have enough of those guys in the club adding to the competition, being a useful piece for the first team, for the second team. Like, we have no idea how a lot of this is going to shake out, but it's a nice addition, and it's always a good story when a hometown guy gets a chance to come out and play for the club as well.
One of those teams he spent time on, James, last year was LAFC, and that was with Bob Bradley, and that's what Bob Bradley said when he was asked about him. He said that he got to know the guy, and the biggest thing that stood out to him was how much he wanted to be here in Toronto. And it's a nice story. If you follow them on any social medias, they're very active on it. They have some nice vlogs out there as well, and very personable people. So you get it, not only someone who wants to be here, but you get a good person, and by all accounts so far, someone who could definitely stop a ball or two, and play, a very big role potentially for TFC2 or their next pro team, or even step up to the first team if called upon. So very nice addition, I think, overall, from that third keeper spot, which doesn't often. I mean, it was Kevin Silva the last couple of years, so that tells you all you need to know there.
Wow, unnecessary.
It's not about him, but
it sounded like it. Let's I think we have a couple more things in a rundown here. Non-Toronto FC here. So did anyone have any last thoughts on TFC as we get set for the season that's looming?
I mean, are we not going to talk about Jesus? I think we're contractually obligated to at least discuss that nice goal and his sort of enthusiasm. I think he's definitely an upgrade on Terrence Boyd. So there's that.
We'll see.
Nobody wants to talk about Jesus.
We'll see when the first penalty attempt comes around.
Yeah.
He's a bit of an unknown to me, like I can't say that I watch a whole lot of Polish football or that I was familiar with, the third division in Spain or wherever it was that he came out of back before he made that move. But, that first impression, and granted it was pretty small, was very tidy. It was a real, I mentioned before that I don't know how intentional that touch from Pozuelo was to put the ball on his feet, but the sharpness from a striker to sort of collect the ball in his radius and turn and put that in the back of the net. How many times have we seen somebody have a half chance like that and just whiff terribly? And so that sort of clinical ability bodes well for a team that's going to put a lot of balls into those dangerous spots this year. So I really like that. I didn't see a ton, and part of this is just preseason. We don't get the benefit of replays, and the camera angles are what they are. I didn't see as much of the interplay as I would like, or as much of his probing runs to the back line, which is something that Bob has talked about a lot, his ability to read when to check to the ball or when to push him behind and all that sort of stuff. But that'll all come with time. And, given he'd spent, 5 days with the team, I think it's a pretty nice, debut cameo for the guy. So, and by all accounts, he's a good guy. Our first conversation with him, Mike, was entertaining, I must say. He's the translated interviews are always a little bit difficult. There's those little interactions in between the questions where you can sort of get the slightest glimpse of what a guy is like, and he seemed like a good guy. So that's all good, and you need somebody to bang in the goals for you while we don't know what Iowa's status is, and so it looks like he's going to be a nice addition.
Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, no, just building off what James said, he seems like he's a very good person and someone who teammates definitely like. and that's something that that wasn't always evident last year with this group of players. And I think they've made a purpose of going out and seeking out players who will definitely fit in culturally with this team, and he seems to check that box. But more than that, he's a very good player. Like this
Nice.
guy is, especially when you're looking at an MLS kind of caliber. He could be a starting striker in this league
Nice.
from my early impressions, and he's someone who this team hasn't really had a lot of. He can do it all. Like he can drop down, drop back, and link up within the midfield if he needs to. He can press if he needs to. I noticed one of the things that really stood out to me is how much he moves, how much movement is there with Jesus, and he applies a lot of pressure, and he's willing to make those runs. And I thought that was really great. And of course, he has the finishing touch, which is always crucial in your number 9. So I loved what I saw from him. I think this could be a very valuable signing. I know TFC they invested a lot into him, and hopefully he pays dividends. And it's so far so good. 1 goal in 1 match.
Yeah, we joke about Terrence Boyd, but I do think that's actually important. Like, again, the first impression Toronto FC fans got of Terrence Boyd was him skying a penalty, and he just never looked the same confidence-wise. So I know it's a preseason game, and I know it's all those things, but to get your first goal for the club that early and that quick, like that's got to build confidence for a new striker.
Absolutely.
And now, like, he doesn't have to worry about that anymore. That's not a concern for him. He's got his goal. I know it's not an MLS play, but he's still found the back of the net for TFC. So I do think, striking performance is so much confidence based that is such an important thing for him to have done already. Let's move on to our last few topics, and another big one. The Canadian Premier League champions, Forge FC. No, they're not even.
No.
Oh, wow. No, they were the CONCACAF League. Wow, that's how they got in. Yeah, there you go. I'm not used to not saying Forge is the Canadian Premier League champions. But anyway.
They did sign 2 of the champions.
So that's true. Yeah, they basically have the same roster now in Terry Campbell and Ali Hadjab before. But yeah, tomorrow at 8 p.m., Cruz Azul are coming to town. Tim Hortons Stadium had quite a good couple weeks in terms of the matchups that have been there. Round of 16, the CONCACAF Champions League, unquestionably the biggest game in the club's history, and Cruz Azul considered one of the favorites, honestly, in this year's competition. I mean, you mentioned some of the signings there that they've made. Another big one, obviously, former Toronto FC man Ashton Morgan, who has plenty of CONCACAF Champions League experience and is going to be very much relied upon to be a leader in that side. This one's super exciting. I mean, for Canadian soccer in general, the chance to see one of our clubs, truly our club, go up against one of the giants of CONCACAF and one of the giants, honestly, in world soccer and Cruz Azul. And I mean, certainly it would be an uphill battle for them to win this, but it's going to be fun regardless. That match is going to be something special.
Truth. Aggregate too.
Canada's had a lot of pretty big soccer moments over the past couple of years. I've been following this game for a long time, and you'd be hard pressed to find a 3-year period where there have been so many momentous days that just make you go like, wow, is this actually happening for us and for this game right now? And so, this is just another one of those moments where CPL club is taking on Liga MX opposition in the CONCACAF Champions League, and that's just a Wednesday night nowadays in this new soccer league. Forge in the CONCACAF League showed themselves really well. I don't think any of us really knew. When a league comes about, you see how the teams play against each other, but you don't really know how they're going to fare against other opposition until they get the chance to. And Forge went into some really difficult situations and they acquitted themselves well, and the reward for that is what's going to be 2 pretty epic nights in the history of this young club. And they've got a strong core to that side, which is largely intact. They re-signed Dom Samuel and they re-signed Alex Achinoli Johnson, whose last name I always have to take extra special care to pronounce properly.
That was fun to watch you enunciate, yeah.
Losing Mobabuli and Kwame Owuwa are big losses, but as you mentioned, a couple of additions from Pacific. Ashton Morgan, a guy who, I'll never forget him taking the field against the Rabe Unido at BMO Field in 2010 or whatever it was. And, it's going to be fun, and that's all you sort of want from these games. The CONCACAF midweek games have always been some of my favorite nights, and so we get to prepare ourselves for a couple more, and yeah, it's a pretty big task to host Cruz Azul and then go into Azteca, but Bobby Smirniotis has had these guys do things that have surprised us before, so I'm just going to watch it and enjoy, and not have any preconceived notions about how it's going to go. But what a night, man! What a night!
Well, here's a little thing to kind of push you in a positive direction here, James, is whenever you see a matchup like this, me personally, and it's a monumentous matchup, especially when, let's face it, Forge is coming in as heavy underdogs. I like to look at the weather forecast. And the weather forecast for tomorrow is we're getting a little bit of a heat wave. I think it's supposed to be something like 6 or 7 degrees, but it is pouring rain.
Ooh.
Could they do it in a rainy night in the Hammer at Tim Hortons Field?
We're gonna
Kinda
find
get things
out.
started.
Yeah.
We'll find out exactly, and then obviously the big one in a couple of weeks or next week is the matchup at the Azteca, and that's the place that TFC knows very well. TFC fans know very well, and now let's see how Forge handles that environment, because it's going to be a lot more raucous than what TFC last experienced
Yep.
there, and with what the men's national team even last experienced there. So it's gonna be fun. Let's put it that way. It's gonna be a lot of fun for Forge FC fans.
So many Canadians are going to be up on pictures in that hallway now.
Yeah.
It's like we're just invading that hall of heroes. But yeah, I mean, it's a mountain they got to climb. No one is mincing words there, but never count this team out, man. Every time someone tries to count this team out, they do the impossible. So at this point, you just sort of buckle up and watch and expect something shocking to happen. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it.
Yeah. Also worth noting, of course, CF Montreal, the Canadian champions. I didn't stumble over that one. Begin their CONCACAF campaign. That's tonight at 10 p.m.
Yeah.
They're headed to Santos Laguna for the first leg in that one. So that'll certainly be a tricky one. A club that certainly Toronto FC knows very well from some past Champions League experiences, and that'll be a fun one to watch as well. How Montreal can fare in this Champions League and build off what they were able to do last season, which was an upward season for them under Wilfred Nancy. So two more good matches to watch before we even get to the MLS regular season as a whole. So very much excited for those. And speaking of big matches, a number of them coming up for a women's national team. Again, it's been a lot of men's national team in recent weeks, considering the upward trajectory and all the incredible things they've done in World Cup qualifying. But we all know the women's national team are very much deserving of the spotlight and have led the way in this country for so many years. And again, they're going to go up against some of the best in the world over the next couple of weeks, beginning on Thursday against an English national team they know very well. Sunday they head to Carroll Road and play the Germans, and then wrap things up at the Molineux against Spain next Wednesday.
Amazing.
We'll have more talk on this certainly on next week's show. But James, your thoughts on this camp as a whole, and Canada getting the chance, as I guess reigning Olympic champions, to test themselves against some of the best in the world.
Yeah, I think this is a really important time for the women's national team program, in terms of something that Bev said herself after the Olympic gold was that success came a little bit earlier than they had sort of anticipated. They all knew that there were some steps forward to take with this team, and to have it happen so quickly, you have to ask yourself, how do you respond to something like that? Canada is going to be the team that every country is sort of looking at and going that they have what we want. And so how Canada both manages to take the steps internally that they need to do while fending off the pressure that spotlight brings is going to be a fascinating thing to watch with this team.
Absolutely.
And, we've seen a lot of these little cup tournaments over the years, and often there's one or two good teams. So for Canada to sort of, kick off this next chapter against, 3 fellow top 10 teams in the world, it's you always want to test yourself, and it's a big couple of years ahead. I know the CONCACAF Women's Championship is coming up this summer, and then the Olympics aren't too far ahead. So there's it's always funny, the next challenge awaits right after the last trophy is handed out. And so how Canada adapts to this situation, under Bev and how they go forward is going to be what I'm looking for from these games. How does that continue to develop? And without Sinclair, we all know she'll miss this. It's pretty much the roster that we all would have expected. A couple of younger names sprinkled in there. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Should be 3 pretty epic nights. And who doesn't love a football match in England for these women to get that experience in front of those crowds? It's going to be great.
Absolutely.
I'm excited to watch Deanne Rose, and kind of she's been balling out, and I want to see how much she's evolved since the last time that we saw her on the national stage, and she'll be probably put in the spotlight there with Sinclair out. I know she was a big focus of Canada's attack at the Olympics, and even more so now with their talisman out there. And another thing that you kind of touched on was the talent that they're going up against. That's something Bev Priestman has made a point of, is putting this women's national team against the world's best, ensuring that they're in these competitions.
Yep.
So that leading up to the CONCACAF championship and also Olympic qualifying, that they're playing against the team of the world's best, because that's what they want to up their level and make sure that they can compete. They know what they're up against. They're competing against the world's best here heading into those tournaments, and it worked very well heading into the Olympics, obviously, when they came away with the win. So I like the way that Bev is preparing them, and we'll see, as James said so elegantly, how they'll respond after their Olympic triumph.
Yeah, the Deanne Rose shout is a great one, because that's a player who fairly consistently stepped up for Canada in these big moments. Obviously scored a goal in the bronze medal game against Brazil all those years ago. And let's not forget, she was the one who won that penalty that Canada converted against the United States. So that's a player who I think certainly, like Mike said, is taking the next step and now playing at the pro level and playing at, a very high level. Now those abilities, we'll see how they translate with a bigger role on this national team. But I think we'll call it there, guys. James, thanks so much for joining us for this entire show. That was awesome, getting some good preseason insights and everything else. So I love these
roundtables, man. I love them.
Yeah.
It's my pleasure. Anytime. I always look forward to chatting some footy with you gentlemen. So
appreciate it, James, so much.
And thank you to everyone for all your questions, comments throughout the show in the chat. Some great banter this week. And on behalf of James Grossi, Jeffrey P. Nesker, and Michael Singh, I'm Mitchell Tierney. Till next Tuesday.